We have some questions for you and see if you could give us some direction. So I'd like to make this offering to help us with that. Okay.
As Aboriginal people, when we seek knowledge, we offer protocol. It is an act of respect, acknowledging that in order for learning to occur, there must be a relationship between the learner and the teacher. These men are highly respected Cree elders. They speak the language and perform the ceremonies that have been passed on from generation to generation. We brought them together to talk about water. What they taught us was relationship.
We had 4 people that came together to start us off right. There's a lot of emotion involved because they mean what they say. From a very deep spiritual place comes the teaching about every decision you make today will have an impact on 7 generations. It's huge because it means that they take their responsibility as teachers, as elders, as human beings, very, very seriously.
Our relationship with our mother, the earth, a relationship with the water, with all of the different plants and the medicines, the herbs, the animals, the birds, all the 4-legged beings, everything that we encounter in our lives, there's a relationship.
When we talk to the elders about worldview and we talk to them about relationships, they describe to us, or at least the Cree elders talk to us about something called Wakotulin, the doctrine of relationships, or the rules that are in place that keep relationships healthy. Those rules were guidelines that helped us to understand what my relationship with my kid is, what my relationship with my community needs to look like, and what are the rules that inform those relationships.
The cyclical nature of life is a fundamental understanding for Indigenous cultures around the world. For thousands of years, this understanding has been carved into stone and embedded in our philosophy. This spiral represents Cree worldview, the interconnected nature of all human relationships. A worldview is the way we see and interpret the world. It includes our philosophy, values, and beliefs.
So if we look at this spiral and we look at every single rung as it goes around, the very first rung will be the individual, then the family, the clan, our nation, our natural world, and our cosmology or the spirit world. And so that is every single rung represents a different level of our community or our society. And by showing it as rungs that are interconnected, that one becomes the other, it's a nice way of representing interconnectedness.
The first relationship is between the Creator and the Cree people. This relationship gives rise to the sacred gifts. The land, water, animals, plants are considered sacred, given to us by the Creator. They are sacred because our survival depends on their survival. We take care of these gifts by having rules that tell us how we respect all of creation. In the Cree language, these rules are called Wahuhtoan.
Wahuhtoan, from the time you're born until you become an old person, it's all about your relationships.
Wahuhtoan is represented by the spaces in between each rung of the spiral. It is the rules about how we are to relate to and show respect for all our sacred gifts.
Hi, ki statuit big ki. Ha get ko to sich vor ani kana soka pika ki kamanistu.
Yo asiwian tisimana sihtan apunipe. Apuya kawe hangi traunan kawe mitawya hangpik kawe pakasumwa pukan semas tahay kimanatsi tahamampe.
There's a lot of things that the Indian people have, but the most important thing is water. We thank the Creator, and we thank the spirit of the water. We give them tobacco, so this water stays pure, clean. Protect the nature, all the animals that come to drink from here. Be good. Healthy. That's what it is.
Those are the actions of a human that are small in some ways, but they're huge because it creates that relationship, that attitude towards that water.
It's just one of our important elements in our way of life, and it's very sacred to us because we also take water as part of our cultural ceremonies.
And the sweat lodge is used in there. When you put that splash on that rocks, the steam washes the sickness, purifies the body.
The water is something that is part of me, and I need to respect the water. It brings life to my table. Like I go hunting, I get a moose, whatever food there is out there along the river, I'm sure to bring it home. I gotta respect the water because if the water changes, my life's gonna change with it.
Cree philosophy is based on ensuring the survival of humans and the physical world. Life is lived in a sustainable way because what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. We are interconnected and in relationship with everything around us.
Anything that gave us life was considered holy, sacred. The air that I breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat, all of that gives us life. And we treat it with respect.
When we pick medicines, we have to take tobacco and we have to put it in Mother Earth and thank Creator for giving us this medicine. It's what I should be doing. It's my job, and I feel very important in that I pass on my tradition, my culture to my grandchildren. You know, because it's as a grandmother, this is what I should be doing.
The water is medicine for us, the people. Sometimes we have aches in our bone or headaches and all. We ask for a blessing that the water can help us and to heal us. And I feel that it's healthy. You will always find the muskeg water in the spruce trees area. You see all that medicine in there. Sometimes I take a little branch and I look at it. The roots picks up the water and it becomes the needles. And it grows into the needles. And even the willows leaning into the hole, it's like a message that the water is already been blessed. So we can take it home and drink from it. We make tea, and no wonder these elders, every time we bring water home, always the teapot was full, but it gets empty really fast.
It is about survival. And in order to survive, you need relationship with your family, with the community, with the land.
Our people, for thousands of years, created that balance, and they coexisted with everything around them. We need that connection. We need that relationship with the natural world. You can't be separate from it, otherwise you wouldn't exist. So what we try to do as a people is to fit into that, to become a part of it, and not to try to overpower it or control it.
We're not dominant over anything, that we as human beings are only just like a ripple or a piece of sand that's on a beach, you know. That's how small you think we are in the whole creation. It's so beautiful that in the beginning when you look at this, everything was in balance, everything had reason to be there. You look at the water and you're standing on the earth, Mother Earth, and the sun is shining on you, and you're breathing air, breath of life. One cannot go without the other, or there'd be no life. Amazing, amazing how beautiful the earth was. Still is yet.
Knowledge about who we are and our place in the world is earned through ceremony. A fasting ceremony teaches us not only about sacrifice, but about our relationship with water.
You know, the one time I fasted, I remember the only thing I thought about was water. I never thought about food. I wasn't hungry. I was thirsty. You know, that was what was the hardest part of fasting.
But when you want to talk about water, how precious it is for life, that's what you need to do. When you go out there without food and water for 2 days, 4 days, you will know that that is life itself.
One time I heard an old man talk, and he talked about the rivers and the creeks, how they flow. He said it's the same thing as your veins, all that blood that goes through your veins. It's just like your heart. If it quits, you die. The water goes down, the plants and the trees will die off. This is what keeps the life of the trees, the environment. When you respect the water, it'll respect you. If you don't respect that water will take you.
Our people were taught how to respect everything. Take what you need only, not more. Take what you need to survive with. But as different cultures come in, then all of a sudden things begin changing. Our people started hunting animals for the fur trade, different things like that, you know, and started losing those teachings of that respect already. And so we create an off balance in everything.
The history of colonization is a story that's still mostly told from the colonizer's perspective. There is more to that story.
There was a clash of worldviews that happened upon contact. When European people came here, they looked at Indigenous people and made a lot of assumptions. The people were primitive, they were savage, they had no philosophy, they had no relationship with a creator, that they were heathen, pagan. There were a lot of words that were used to describe Aboriginal people.
The newcomers that came over overlooked the knowledge that was already here. And it was so predictable to where we're at today because of the lack of relationship to the land and not asking the Blackfoot, the Cree, how were you able to sustain a civilization this long? And the early ethnographers that came to us didn't do us any favor when they start using words like primitive, nomadic. Those have very negative connotations and connotations that justify ignoring the knowledge that was here.
From that perspective, the entire society was discarded as being less than European society. Never mind their philosophy and their science. There was an assumption those didn't even exist. However, there's a lot of scholarly work that has proven what the elders have told us, that prior to contact, there was an intact worldview, a philosophy of Indigenous people, there was a pedagogy of teaching this philosophy, there was a science that came out of that philosophy, a way of seeing the world and knowing the world around us. And it was a successful way of seeing the world because people were surviving and doing quite well.
Since 1763, the Indigenous worldview has been under attack, not with guns or bombs, but with this paper.
When you want to justify something, in our case, murderous, what do? You legislate.
More than 100 years prior to the enactment of the Canadian Constitution in 1867, there were numerous government policies created and implemented to address the Indian problem. The first was the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which placed Aboriginal people under the protection of the British Crown. In 1850, 2 acts were passed that took away the legal right of Indian nations to determine their own membership. Soon after that, the inferior status of Indian identity was written into legislation. And in 1876, the Indian Act was passed. Aboriginal people were now dependent wards of the state. In 1884, the Indian Act was amended to protect Indians from their own cultures by prohibiting ceremonies. Jail terms of 2 to 6 months would be given to anyone engaging in ceremony. Funded by the federal government and contracted out to church organizations, the residential school system was established with the ultimate goal to remove children from their families, assimilate them, and eventually be rid of Aboriginal identity, tribes, and culture.
This was the junior boys' dormitory. And I would be staring at the ceiling all night, really lonely. I was lonely for my parents, my grandparents, because my home is just over here. And I'd miss them so terribly. And so this, what was our dorm, really represented that disjointedness.
I learned a little bit about reading and writing, but majority of it is to survive that system, how to steal, cheat, manipulate, fight, everything, you know, just to survive.
You know, you send people to these schools and they come out of here just totally a mess. When people tell me, just get over it about these schools, my response is, God, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice just to get over it?
The impact of policy and legislation on Aboriginal worldview has been devastating, leaving many of our people not knowing who they are and their place in the world.
There was every effort made to kill the Indian in the child. And as a result, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Aboriginal people across Canada are carrying the burden of those policies even today. So if we go back to our spiral and we say that we needed to understand Wahkotowan, or those rules of relationships, to hold that spiral up, as these policies were tabled, they were direct attacks on our ability to understand Wahkotowan, for the elders to teach us what Wahkotowan meant. And that was the attack on the infrastructure that kept that spiral up. And as that infrastructure was attacked over and over and over again, the spiral begins to fall, and rungs begin to touch each other, and those healthy boundaries of respect between the rungs, those boundaries are gone. And eventually, even though Wahkotowan still exists, it's not being taught, and that spiral falls down.
These residential schools took everything away like that. And how is it that you're supposed to raise your children, you know, how to respect themselves as well as creation and that, you know, yeah.
The more I think about it, it has everything to do with water. We need to talk about this. Water gives us life. And when people have very little regard for young children's life and can put them in residential schools, it's the same kind of thinking, I can destroy this water, without ever thinking, what are the consequences of my actions?
My understanding of technology was that it was supposed to help improve our lives. You have to wonder, yes, in some levels, our lives are greatly improved. But on some levels, this technology is challenging the natural world.
But long time ago, this water, they were talking about Athabasca. Long time ago, we used to use it lots. We used to go down the river and wash our clothes with it. We used to eat fish from there. That's how I lived long time ago. Now today, nothing. Everything, nothing.
We've seen fish floating belly up and swords on them, dead fish. So I mean, after that, there was no way I was going to ever eat fish from the river.
When you go to the lake now, it's just you'll be just, the silence will just deafen you. You might hear a loon, you might see a pelican, you might see the absence of life, well, it's just sad.
We believe that the earth has a heart. It has organs like a human being. A mother that nourishes us. And here we are as humans, her children are prodding at her and taking stuff every day without even saying thank you. They're taking so much, so few people are benefiting from so many years. It's not right. And yet the people that are living in there are poor. Not only they're physically poor, living in poverty, their health is being affected every day.
I mean, they come forward and say, well, we'd like to have a meeting with you and say, because we're a new plant, we're going to put a new plant up and that. And meanwhile, they already have all the papers that says, go ahead.
When I travel to the communities and talk to community people and elders and see the hurt, the despair, when you talk about the environment, the water, the land, the hurt they feel is the fact that no one's talking to them. No one seems to care.
We always seem to be like run over, like we can't, anything we have to say, it doesn't matter.
They're supposed to come and talk to us and ask for our input or whatever we have to say.
To be after the fact.
After the fact, then it's
after the fact.
Signed, sealed, and delivered, and then it's done deal, and then they tell us about it.
They always say, we'd like to hear your concerns. Well, our concerns are this, and water is one of them. The air, everything that we need, that we live on, is taken away from us.
It's pretty discouraging. Yeah, very discouraging. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I felt that too. I mean, I felt like, what's the use, We see so much problems, addictions, and, so much hate and anger and resentments. But there's a deeper issue going on.
A lot of the despair is also historical for Aboriginal people because they remember the fact that government to government, leaders from Indian nations and leaders from the Canadian or English government came together, signed treaties, not just between two parties, but there was a third party involved, and the third party was the Creator, because it was signed under the pipe. And the pipe to Aboriginal people is very sacred. And that three-way agreement, that agreement can never be broken. So when these agreements are challenged or broken or not respected, there's a real despair there because it's how can people not respect God, the Creator, who is part of this important honoring of our relationship between Canadian people and First Nations.
Moya, you cannot attack me, excuse me. That's a mean word, Cree. But white people, they call it Canada. That's Cree word, clean, eh?
Nobody is suggesting that we go back and live in teepees, not that it won't hurt us. But what we're saying is there's enough for all of us. What gives us life? There's enough. This land can sustain us, but just take what you need. We're a consumer society. We are a wasteful society. It starts with me. I am complicit, and I don't want to ever just be pointing fingers. But surely to goodness I can think and I can try and articulate that what we're doing right now is not progress. And people say, well, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is we're not stupid, are we? To use our imagination. Because what we're doing right now doesn't take any kind of brilliance to realize it is not sustainable. We can't keep pouring chemicals into this.
A lot of times I go down the river and I stand there and I pray and talk to the water spirit. If there was a way to change, I would change.
We pray for these things, but it's us that turn around and we do it over and over again, and we're begging for forgiveness and asking for it to be put right again. You know, it's very true. Maybe one day the Creator will get tired of listening to us because we're asking for the same thing over and over, and we're not doing our part. We're not taking care of the gifts that are given to us.
When I think about this oil and stuff like that, you know, it's a necessity today, but we could live without that. But you can't live without this water. So it's up to us, I guess, to try and teach, you know, people to respect water, that water is life. Without water, we perish.
I think that we have to listen to the elders. We don't understand anymore what it means to be good to each other. We've lost the rules of relationship. We don't understand what it means to give people the respect they deserve and to have people participate in meaningful ways to ensure that everybody is a part of decision-making. We've lost that.
Reconciling damaged relationships needs to happen at all levels of our worldview, including the relationship between Aboriginal people and Albertans. Alan Benson began a dialogue about this issue with former Alberta Environment Minister, Dr. Lorne Taylor.
Personally, it's been very difficult for me to try and work with Aboriginal communities. There's really not a lot of response that I was getting back. And part of the problem is, I think now looking back at it, is we were trying to deal with the leadership, the Aboriginal leadership, the elected leadership, and they didn't want to talk to us or talk to me because I wasn't a sovereign. What they wanted to talk to is the federals, because it was the federal is the sovereign state, and they didn't want to respond to us, which I think is unfortunate. And so around the cabinet table when these issues would come up, and we didn't quite frankly know how to deal with a lot of them. I'd say there's very little relationship between the Aboriginal community and the Alberta, very little meaningful relationship, let's put it that way. There are relationships, but what's a meaningful relationship? To me, a meaningful relationship is where you can sit and talk to each other, you sit around a table and solve problems together. But typically you'd push off the issues, the water issues, the education issues, the social issues to the feds, because it's a federal responsibility. Really what we did is just say, well, it's a federal responsibility, we'll ignore it.
So the issue then, outside of the legal responsibility, is really relationships. How do we establish a trusting relationship between Aboriginal community from government to government? That trusting relationship hasn't been established. That's the first.
Yeah, and I would agree.
And
not just on the Aboriginal side either, on the government side too.
Right.
It goes both ways, Alan.
So the trust is on both sides.
Yeah.
And the other is the constituents. So the Alberta community needs to better understand the issues that Aboriginal people are facing.
Absolutely.
And the Aboriginal community need to understand what that relationship should look like.
We don't know, in my mind, we don't know what to do, Alan, as a white society, as a majority society. We don't have a clue. And part of that not having a clue is because you guys won't talk to us.
So, and part of the reason that discussion hasn't happened is trust. And clearly, anytime we create any kind of dialogue between people, we have to build trust, right? And we have to start some sort of dialogue. And I think as long as we can start the dialogue, then we can start to better understand each other. That's the first.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems, I think, with me, white society. I often say, I don't have time for dialogue. I say, here's the problem. Let's take a half hour, solve the problem, and get underway, because I don't have any more time than that, right? And when you're a cabinet minister, like I was for 8 or 9 years or whatever it was, you give people half-hour time slots.
And that's a significant different worldview right there. That the Aboriginal worldview is about we need to build relationships. We need to understand each other better. And we need to be able to talk through this stuff. We need to be able to do it through the right protocols.
Yeah.
And because it's not today's issue, it's how it affects us next 7 generations.
Yes.
Whereas, as you said, government's perspective is let's get a quick fix.
Yeah.
Let's make a decision.
Have time.
We don't have time.
We operate in 4-year segments, right?
Yeah.
Because I got to stand for election 4 years from now. And I used to say, quite frankly, which my wife said, don't say it because you're being too cynical, but it's absolutely true. My next election campaign started the day I got elected.
The solutions for the problems that have been created over the last couple hundred years are not outside the Aboriginal community. The solutions are within the community.
Yeah, it's true.
So the Aboriginal community and Albertans have to come together in this dialogue you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're right, outside the political realm.
Yeah.
Some relationships are just easier to build than others. Here are University of Alberta water scientist Dr. David Schindler and Cree Nakota grandmother Violet Putra.
We just need to get together and tell the people, not just Aboriginal people, but tell the rest of the people, well, let's do it together. Let's start respecting our water and what Creator has provided for us. Not just water, life in general, the trees and the animals and everything else that He's given us.
I think the sort of natural meeting ground is where the science was when I started in science about 5 decades ago. I started as a good naturalist. Most of these Aboriginal people who've grown up on the land are good naturalists, and it's a very powerful tool that we need to reincorporate in the way we do science. It isn't all about more sensitive instruments and more powerful computers. I can remember in the early days of studying pollutants, we thought we were great when we could analyze the chemistry to parts per thousand. And then a decade went by and we could measure to parts per million, and then parts per billion. And now for some chemicals, we can measure to parts per trillion. But the peculiar thing is that for some chemicals, closely behind being able to analyze them at that level, toxicologists were coming in and analyzing whether they were toxic. And we now know that some things are toxic at parts per trillion. To me, that tells me that there's some deeper water ethic that we need. And the closest I see to that water ethic is what I see in older Native people.
I see that a reconciliation between our sciences is one of the first places we can start. We can look at Western science and we can look at Indigenous science. And in this project, that's what we've been doing. And mostly we found common ground.
Well, I grew up with teachings around water. I mean, everything we did, we fished, we hunted, and with my mushroom on the trap line, he would take us out to the beaver dams and he'd pick medicines. He wasn't teaching us about what each medicine was used for because we didn't have a right to know that yet, but how important water was to feeding those medicines. And so growing up in that environment and spending as much time as we did in the lake country, it was just part of who we were.
I grew up on the Lake of Constance, which is a really huge lake and one of the major water reservoirs for drinking water for as well Switzerland, Austria, as also Germany. So as kids, we used water for recreational purposes, for going fishing, sailing, rowing, swimming, throw each other in the water and just have fun. The water was kind of the part which you had fun. So water is part of my life. And actually what I have also told my family is the day I die, I want that they throw my ash into the Caribbean because it's water and it's warm water. I don't like to freeze, even if I'm dead. So, but it has to be in the water. It has to be in the water. Water is emotional. You cannot explain water. You have to feel water. The structure of the water is fascinating. When you go down to the very smallest part, the molecules, for example. Molecules, they sit kind of like that on top of one another. And in the liquid state, the water is actually the heaviest. So that's why the ice swims on the top. So there's a lot of this kind of relationships when you start to study the science and you look into the details, you see that water is different. Water is not like the rest of the nature and what's out in the nature. Water is different, and it's probably that what makes life possible.
So I'm trained as a chemist. So when I studied how to measure things. So over last 20 years or so put a lot of effort in studying chemical contaminants such as arsenic and how it affects human health. But talking to Alan last time also, they further got me interested in the indigenous component when we were talking about cattail and rattail too. Interestingly, Aboriginal people using that as medicine. And we then also did a study on those where the levels of arsenic is high, is on the surface of the rattail and cattail. And you said something about how the indigenous people know what component to eat and what component not to eat, even before we actually had the analysis.
That's what excited me, because we didn't know it was arsenic, right? Our elders didn't know that. But what they did know is what they got from ceremony was that this medicine could be used, but not a certain part of the medicine, right?
For our people, of course, we never had hospitals, but for thousands of years, we had healthy people, you know? And the main source of our health, I think, derives from the fact that we knew certain things in nature. My wife's grandmother, for example, she passed away when she was about 108, 110, somewhere in there. And, but she knew, you know, probably over 500 different species of plants, what she used as herbs and medicines to doctor up the people, to help them overcome some illnesses. So that in itself was a lifelong learning, and she passed a lot of that on to us, her children, grandchildren. In other words, the Creator had already put in place everything we need to live, right? And so that's, to me, it's not recreating something that already existed. It's reclaiming it and restoring it and recognizing that we need to do this if we're going to survive as a species, as a people.
When we have our spiral so full of chaos and the relationships are so damaged, first and foremost, we need to create space for that infrastructure to be put back in, that Wahkotowan that provided the scaffolding and the infrastructure so our spiral can be whole and beautiful and functional. We need to first put the Wahkotowan back in. You know, and that's a Cree term, but what we're saying in English is that we all need to be operating using the same playbook, the exact same rule book, the same values and caring and connectedness to each other, that there's a place for that within that spiral.
We can protect our water resources and have the natural water resource, but if we have messed it up, we have to clean it up. There is no other way around, because we have been polluting the water with all our activities. And we have to do the same effort as we did for polluting it to clean it up again. This is, I think, there is where we could really find each other.
Yeah.
Because we have both the same, we want both the same. We want to have healthy, clean water.
But it just goes back to Wahkotowan, right? For something to be sacred, there has to be a trust relationship with it. It's the sacred relationship is essentially a trust relationship. It's a connected relationship with the water. And to do that, we have to have a sacred relationship with each other.
Wahōtēwān would provide for us an opportunity to shake hands, to be able to say, you know what, that was a bad day we had yesterday, but I forgive the situation, I forgive you, and I forgive myself, as an example. So you create that wahōtēwān again, you create that relationship, you repair it.
And when we've reclaimed that, we can then begin the second principle, which is the reconciliation of these relationships. All the relationships that have been damaged as a result of things that have happened in history, those relationships must be repaired.
In our language, we call it wahōtēwān, which is, it's a broad term talking about relationship in general, relationship on an individual level to family, community, nation. And so I think on this level, we have a relationship with you already, and you have one with us, you know, and that one binding thing about that relationship, as you said this earlier, is the water. We are connected that way, and maybe that's really what the Creator wants us to see.
And then that brings us to our third principle, which is self-determination. Nobody else is responsible for our relationships but us. We can't expect the government to do it for me. I can't expect other people to fix my relationships.
I know what he's saying in his heart, that he wants everybody to come together and work together, try and make a better world, you know? We can help if we're taken seriously and if we're taken with that respect. We have been mistrustful because we've always sort of felt, well, you know, they're paid employees of the oil company. So the people living in that community have a very, very tough time to trust,
Definitely need to talk,
Right, for profit, you know.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you have profit for profit and the rest, I don't care. And whatever happens when we are gone, it's not my problem anymore. I understand every single Aboriginal who said, why should I talk to these guys? Why should I talk to these guys, you know? There is a history, and there's 250 years of history behind it, which actually didn't work in the direction we were nicely talking here. It was just the opposite.
Well, thank you for saying that very much. It's very well.
My trust level has just gone up.
I really believe that if your prayers are in the right place, which is in your mind and in your heart, and you're really believing what you're doing, even at your level, which is the scientific level, you could still make things better just by believing that we've been given a very beautiful place in this country, on this side of the earth, a very, very beautiful country. We have to appreciate that and thank the Creator and start taking better care of our country in more ways than one.
I agree totally.
The whole notion of Wahōtēwān is it's for everyone. The elders have told us it's inclusive, and we all have a part to play. We all have to think about our relationships, examine and reflect upon what are the nature of these relationships and how do I improve them.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I feel like saying, I don't come here to play, suht. Kui tapu anoma, niistä kisin tapuin kaskitana, teki vitsakin sinua, hoassa kote.
If we don't teach our children and our grandchildren how to respect the environment, how to respect those birds, those animals, the trees, what kind of a world is that going to be? We always hear this term growing up. What kind of a world are we going to leave for our children? I ask, what kind of a child are we going to leave for the world?